Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this first series of podcasts on business development in Africa. The title of this one is How COVID-19 has Changed Consumer Marketing in Townships and Rural Markets in South Africa and Africa. And joining me today is Akona Malati. Early in his career, Akona worked for SAB and BAT as a brand manager, running promotions in low-income communities before taking a brand manager position at mid-market bank Capitec, who has successfully addressed some of the needs of these township and rural communities. AK, can I ask you to further introduce yourself and talk about what you're doing these days and during the COVID?
Thank you very much, Greg, and good afternoon to you, and good afternoon to everyone who will be watching this. Sure. It's a very interesting time that we're in terms of these COVID times. But before we get to that, just a bit more about my background. I'm originally from the Eastern Cape, the land of the legends, the former Transkei, Umtata. Grew up there and then was fortunate enough to have moved up the coast to the eastern part of the country to KwaZulu-Natal, Durban, where I did the greater part of my growing up and did my university years. And it's then that I started doing a lot of promotional work for a number of big corporate brands. And then I moved from there to working in Stellenbosch in the Western Cape, where I worked for British American Tobacco. And then from British American Tobacco to Capitec Bank. And from Capitec Bank, I moved up to the Big Smoke, Johannesburg, where I was with the Standard Bank Group, where I was within the Diners Club International franchise. And then post that, I decided to move back to Durban, and I started a marketing and communications business, which is called Ewesana Marketing and Communications. Ewesana meaning yes, baby, so very positive intent, where our delivery is your delight. So we deliver promotional services, activations, we deliver marketing strategies, and we deliver PR and communications for multinational corporate organizations, for small businesses, for government organizations and departments. And our big focus has really been within the mid-market and lower market. So we've worked in the rural Transkei in towns such as Idutwa to Lusikisiki. We worked up in the Gauteng area in the Soshanguves of this world. We've worked in the Free State. So we've really worked all around South Africa, and we have a great understanding of the dynamics of these different environments that we have here.
Awesome. As you might know, I first came to South Africa in the late 90s after my company had invested $1.2 billion in Telecom South Africa, a big telecommunications firm. And I was tasked with building the channel development organization. I'm going to circle back to your upbringing because there's quite a bit of alignment. But that role involved, had a major emphasis on fulfilling universal service obligations. What that meant is that we were required to deliver services to areas that had been previously historically neglected during the apartheid era in South Africa. So I spent about a quarter of my time in townships and rural communities, delivering telecommunication services, helping incubate small Black-owned businesses, setting up franchises in communities like Khayelitsha, Umlazi, Platachaba, and Mthatha. Interestingly, in the early days with our monthly meetings, we would fly to Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape. We do our meetings, we drive to East London, do our meetings and fly back the next day. And then, but much later, and then we did a franchise in Mthatha in a small village called Coglan, like the Irish Coglan. And that meant that we were able to fly into Mthatha or drive through Mthatha and through the Transkei and Ciskei area. My colleagues that I would be driving with would comment that that's a border post. I'm like, but we're within South Africa. Why is there a border post here in the middle of nowhere? Because it's very rural. And so it was a big learning experience. And my work wasn't just with small businesses and working in these rural communities, but it's also working with supermarket chains that had well-established presence in townships and these kind of peri-urban communities. And we were able to put in systems to accept bill payments and sell prepaid and do other kinds of customer service activities. But that was a long time ago. As much as I loved it, it has changed prior to the COVID, and it's changed during the COVID, I would imagine. And that's what I would like to speak to AK about today. We'll cover branding and marketing, we'll cover retail, and we'll cover a little bit about Africa's strategy. So first question, AK, how have companies and brands in general handled marketing in Africa's urban and rural areas?
Yeah, so I think previously companies really paid lip service to doing what I would call proper marketing, in the lower income as well as rural areas. I say this because you'd mainly find that decisions would be made from a head office perspective, where people don't really know and don't really understand that market. And they would always try and force that market to try follow what was happening in what we call the first world economy, or within the more urban areas. So you'd often find that there'd be a massive disconnect, and I think this also stems from what we knew in apartheid days, where what you'd normally call the white folks usually thought that the black people wanted to be like them and wanted to actually follow them. And that's what went wrong. Over the years, there's always been a massive disconnect. And what you would find is that the end consumer would not actually get the right benefit in terms of the products that are actually being distributed, or the services that are actually being distributed to them. So I think that's where things had gone wrong. We have started to see a massive shift in terms of thinking, in terms of efforts that have been made, in terms of actually gathering insights and gathering information in terms of what happens at these markets. And therefore brands have actually started to start responding more effectively nowadays. So the shift has started to change, although there still are some gaps that can be improved upon.
And I remember, a lot of our activities, and I'm sure a lot of your activities back in the day, were face-to-face, experiential marketing, events, product promotions, and those kinds of things. Now during the COVID era, that's illegal, or certainly discouraged through social distancing. So how have these big brands, or even small brands, changed the way that they market to these rural and township communities, or have they just kind of put the handbrake on?
So what I'm seeing is that a lot of them have actually put a handbrake on it, but we are starting to see organizations moving more towards a more digital orientated strategic approach, which is working. One of the nice things about technology is that people will always move with technology. And what technology has also shown us is that there's really minimal differences between first world and third world people when it comes to technology, because it's all about how people's mindsets really work. Because if you are forward thinking and you are a person who wants to know the latest, you will jump on to you will use your cell phone to be able to gather information quickly, and you'll use technology to try and make your life a lot easier and to bring a lot more convenience into your life. So what we're seeing during this time is that some organizations have put a handbrake on it. Some organizations are saying, hell, let's use technology. Let's communicate to people one-on-one, and let's make sure that we continue engaging with them in order to make sure that we remain top of mind. Because one of the keys about marketing is it's all about creating an awareness which will lead to consideration, which will lead to trial. Now that's a process. And the whole definition of marketing is a process. And it's a process of managing profitable customer relationships. And that profitability only comes in after you've established a relationship and after it has taken time for you to be able to do so. So the more engagements and the more interactions you have, whether it be via cell phone, whether it be via face-to-face engagements, which we know at this stage have not been taking place, but we can also use people who are connectors, who are influencers within particular areas to be able to pass on strategic messages to the target market in order to get them to actually start appreciating what is being sold or what is being introduced to them, and therefore then lead to, at a later stage, a purchase decision. Now, having said that, obviously everyone has been on lockdown, but as I said, every single communication or every moment of truth that one has with a brand actually leads towards strengthening a bit of a relationship and then enabling one to move down the disposition funnel to be able to lead to a purchase decision, and then hopefully later on to lead to loyalty.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to address the technology issue a little bit later. I'd like to talk about consumer data now. Back in the day, at head office, they would say everybody in the Cape Flats is poor. There's no money. They can't afford our telecommunication services, right? But we know from Vodacom and MTN, even back then, we knew that they were doing extremely well. So, you know, I suspected early on that there was some discrepancies between actual incomes and what you know, the banks and the corporations measured as income. So I went to Khayelitsha, and I went to the shop right there. Khayelitsha's it's a mid-market supermarkets, but it's not much different from any of the American or European supermarkets. And some of these women were actually pushing 2 shopping carts out when they're checking out. I've never seen a busier supermarket in my life. It was really quite remarkable. You know, you got somebody, you go into an area that's thought of as being extremely poor, and you have housewives or mothers pushing out shopping carts filled with $300 worth of goods. Why is that? Why is there such a discrepancy between perceived income and actual income, or has it changed? Has consumer data knowledge, has the data improved over time?
Yeah, I think a lot of that misconception, Greg, stems from the fact that, you know, people previously or organizations previously never used to actually gather real insights in terms of what people within the middle and the lower end are really all about, and therefore, and where they actually spend their disposable income, or how they spend their disposable income, and what products make up the typical basket within that end. You know, what we'd often find is that organizations would sit from a head office perspective, as I said earlier on, and they would have their own thoughts, you know, right, in terms of how these people really work, you know, and it would be based on demographic profiles, you know, that you are a white person living in suburban Johannesburg, or you are in Bishop's Court in Cape Town. Therefore, this is what your basket generally looks like, and this is what you spend your money on. And then you are a black middle-aged person living in the townships in Khayelitsha or in Gugulethu in Cape Town, and therefore this is what you actually look like. But the world has changed. You know, the world has changed because demographic profiles, as much as they still have a little bit of relevance, but more so now, it's about how people think. It's about how they see themselves and how they perceive themselves to be out in the world. It's about lifestyle orientation. More than that, it's about psychographics. So how is someone thinking, you know, and what is their view of their world? And that is what will influence their purchase decisions, you know, and their purchase decisions will then influence the end basket that they actually purchase, you know, which is why, going back to technology, that's why you find people in the townships being technology very savvy, because to them, that is how they perceive themselves, you know, and that's how they want their lives to be shown up as, you know, as people that are forward thinking, as people that are relevant in this day and age. That's why you also see people in the townships with DSTV dishes. You know, you might be driving around and you might see some shacks or some very small flats, but DSTV dishes, because those persons have made, or those people have made, a conscious decision that they want to watch particular content, you know, and they will not be limited to the SABC channels only.
Yeah, there was did some work in the Western Cape a couple of years ago, and these municipalities had customer engagement apps, right? So you go in, you can look at your electricity bill, you can look at your water bill, you can look at your rates and taxes, you can receive a bill, you can pay a bill, you can do all this kind of stuff. You can communicate, you can send messages around, you can form groups around your personal interest, whatever it might be. And we did fielded research into the township, the adjoining township, saying, what do you want from an app to communicate, and what are your reluctance to use technology for communications with the town council and it turned out they wanted the same thing as the high income earners. They wanted to pay their electricity on a prepaid basis using the app, and they wanted the electricity to be turned on straight away, not a week later, which is what they're experiencing as one example. So it is interesting how no matter what the income group is, people are looking to use technology for their communications and for their commerce, for sure.
Absolutely, Greg. I think everyone wants some form of convenience, and technology allows that convenience. So how can we save, or how can our lives be made easier, or how can our lives be improved? And that's why people, you know, no matter what age group, no matter what color, no matter what race, no matter what creed, no matter what income levels, people will always be looking for means and ways to have their lives to be made easier or to be made more convenient.
Right, and they also want to cut their costs, especially in these tough times. But if you're poor, it doesn't.
Absolutely.
Poor is poor, right? But you know, one of the things that's always been a thing for me is equality. Now, I would expect that somebody living in Alexandria, which is about 2 miles to my right, it's a township with many different income levels. I would expect to go there and spend the same amount of money for a Coke as I would over here. And the truth is, in many cases, the disadvantaged pay higher prices per unit than we do. And there's real capitalistic reasons why this is. And there has to be an answer to how to fix it. So the capitalistic reasons why that is you save money by buying in bulk because the production costs and packaging costs are less. And then there's a cost of transport, and especially if you go into risky areas, that price goes up because of security. So people would shop at Macro and load up a pickup truck or a Becky and then take it into the township and either for their own. So what's the answer, AK? I know it's a tough question. I'm putting you on the spot, but what's the way to, Vodacom and MTN charge more per minute and higher data prices and low units and for prepaid voice than you and I pay. And that's just, for me, that's just wrong. So what's the answer?
Yeah, I think we need to look at it from both perspectives. First and foremost, organizations are always going to be looking to make profit and to try to secure the profits. Right. So they will always try and make sure that they secure the easiest money for them, first and foremost, and therefore not charge a premium for that. And then for the harder money to earn, they will always charge a bit of a premium. But then let's look at it from the side of the consumer. The consumer needs convenience. They need to be able to get whatever product or service that they are looking for conveniently. So conveniently located to them. Now, the disconnect here is how the corporate then gets that product there to the, call it, end consumer. And corporates have to start getting to a point where they say, let's not take the risk. Let's ask some of that risk and therefore make it easier for the end consumer to be able to receive the product or service, you know, at their own convenience. So let's partner up with people that have an understanding of the system, that have an understanding of the environment where we want to be placed, and let them take some of that risk, because business is all about taking risks, you know, and then earning a reward for that risk. So the big corporates have to start partnering up with people that are with an easier convenience to the end consumer to enable them to be able to take the product to them. So therefore, corporates have to be able to look at themselves and say, who have we been utilizing all along? And what constraints have they had to be able to get this end product to the end consumer? So maybe let's not look at these people, because somewhere along the line, they're going to need to make some money as well. So let's look at someone who has an understanding of this environment, who's maybe based in that environment, who has greater knowledge of that environment, and therefore the risk is therefore a lot more reduced for them, you know,
Right.
and thereby that will then alleviate some of the cost issues that are associated with it, and then enable the end consumer to be able to actually get it. You know, one other thing that I do want to address on this as well, Greg, going to your earlier point, in terms of where people would automatically just think that the lower end consumes less quality products, which is totally wrong. I mean, you just look at the beer market within South Africa. You know, the premium beers are consumed more in township areas.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at cigarette trade, your Peter Stuyvesants, you know, are more popular than the value for market cigarette brands. You know, you just look at from a fashion and clothing perspective, how township people are always wearing the latest fashion trends and latest labels, etc. So it's an absolute farce, you know, that the lower end, you know, consumes less premium product or less quality product. And the trick for the big corporates, going back to the question, is how do I make my product, which is a quality product, more readily available to the township market or to the middle or lower end? And that is a question that they should be asking themselves.
Yeah, and that's a great point about aspirational buying patterns. And also, and we spoke about this in our last conversation, AK, is you know, these big FMCG companies, these producers and developers of consumer products, you know who they are. They go into disadvantaged communities or lower income groups, and they sell cheaper, they make smaller tubes of toothpaste or lower quality dish liquid or lower quality beer, cheaper beer that has a lower, maybe an expiration date that's a week instead of 3 months. And it's just a wrong way to approach it. And I know there's a lot of very smart people working within these companies trying to fix that, and trying to provide these products and services that people want that aren't cheap, you know, compared to what you and I would buy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of work still has to go into that in terms of changing that and making sure that SKUs or stock keeping units are aligned to what one would find anywhere, you know. So the township market or the lower end of the market does not consume less. So why make a smaller toothpaste? You know, in fact, what you generally find is that the households are bigger, you know, so why not create something bigger, you know? So yeah, so a lot more work has to go into the thinking psyche of multinational corporate organizations and the people that they have in there, who will then have a better understanding of the townships and the middle and lower end of the market.
Yeah, and that's another awesome point you made earlier about the risk, distribution risk. So one of the things we used to do is we would find an entrepreneur, a small business person that actually loads up milk and beer and bread and toothpaste, and they would load it into a small truck, and they would take it into a rural community. And we'd say, okay, cool. Let's call it an enterprise supplier development program. It wasn't, but it was, right? So we will give you an allotment of our prepaid products. Please take them with us. And they would be so grateful, and they say, fantastic. Now we have telecom as the logo, and that has value to them as a growing business. And so we won't do business. We won't take on your competitors' products. We won't take Vodacom and MTN. So no, please take Vodacom and MTN with you, because that will make you more profitable, make your product offering wider. And besides, from our point of view, Vodacom, MTN, Telecom, there's really no profits in rural communities anyway. So our best strategy is to lower our cost, and our lower cost is actually to merge resources from a distribution point of view. Okay, awesome. On the same subject of retail, a segue into retail. Back in the day, I was surprised when I first came to South Africa in the late 90s. I was surprised that I would see people that would work in Sandton, whether they would be a domestic worker or a gardener or a construction worker or a retail clerk, whatever it might be. After work, they would go to Pick and Pay and do the shopping and take all these Pick and Pay bags, supermarket bags, put them in a taxi and go home. Now, there's several reasons why that's not ideal. One is you're putting perishable goods into a hot taxi for an hour. It takes space in the taxi. It's you want to do your home shopping close to home, not where you work, and that's not always the case. Like people sometimes like to bank where they live. And I only found out later that the reason that people do that is because they don't have supermarkets where they live in the townships. Now that has changed a little bit. How much has it changed? Does that dynamic still exist?
Yeah, Greg, I mean, this always saddens me, the fact that people used to go through such trouble and used to travel and spend so much money on transport costs just to get the very basics, or what we call in this COVID era, necessities, or essential products.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, that's what it used to be back in the day. It has changed dramatically. Some of the big supermarket chains have really made some good inroads in terms of that. And without using too many names, but the Spar Group did wonders in terms of that, in terms of going out and actually establishing themselves, particularly within the middle and lower end of the market, and establishing a great footprint within townships and allowing entrepreneurs to be the owners of those supermarkets. I think they really did a great in terms of empowering community members and local community people to be able to be owners, and therefore to be able to get them to serve the local community. So it has changed dramatically, and more so in the last 15 years or so. But prior to that, I mean, yeah, it really used to be very minimal. What Spar did so well was to also take local supermarket owners and get them to actually turn their supermarkets into a Spar, thereby passing on greater savings to the buyers and consumers, and also, helping themselves as Spar Group to be able to have greater footprint within the local community, thereby increasing their brand, and the value of their brand. So it has changed quite substantially over the last 15 years or so, but we can still see a lot more taking place. We now starting to see some of the bigger FMCG companies also partnering with spaza shop owners for their distribution purposes. So we are seeing some of these corporations really starting to become a lot more creative in terms of how they themselves out to the end consumer.
Thank you, AK. That's awesome. I'd like to segue into Africa strategy. Now living in Johannesburg, and I'm sure you have the same dynamic in Durban. So day in and day out, we see the whole social economic spectrum play out before our eyes, from the extremely poor to the extremely wealthy. So we have this first world, third world dynamic. We talked about this in our previous discussion, our previous webcasts as well. And it's not just in South Africa, it's in Africa as well, right? So how do you see this first world, third world dynamic playing out as multinationals move in to Africa as a sort of last frontier?
Yeah, I think for me, the key thing that all organizations need to remember at all times is that all our products and services that we offer are offered to human beings for their consumption. So therefore, we need to make sure that it is easy for them to be able to receive it. So therefore, we need to try and make it as convenient as possible. What do I mean by this? I mean from channels. What channels do we use for our distribution purposes? And we need to make sure that it is the channel of choice for the end consumer, not the channel of choice that we would like to actually utilize, but the channel of choice for the end consumer. So, and if we have that thinking, then it enables us to get closer to our end consumer and to be able to provide them with the value that we are offering. So that for me is key and the most fundamental thing. The next thing is, how can we engage the community as best as possible? So community engagement, particularly now that we are in this COVID era, how can we maximize community engagement as much as possible so that we remain top of mind at all times? Because when we remain top of mind and when we are using the channel of choice, then we are definitely going to ensure that we get our products or services to the end consumer, and we enjoy the economic or financial benefits of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the basics of marketing and channel. Do business with your consumers, engage with them when, where, and how they want. That's so fundamental, and we forget it so quickly when things get a little bit more either challenging or we lack information. Now, community engagement, that's an interesting, from a multinational's point of view, it's a very interesting topic because we don't know who to trust. I may be the only person you've ever met that was born in the city limits of Los Angeles, right? Everybody's from somewhere else. I'm a Californian. If I'm sitting in California, I'm looking at Kenya, or I'm looking at Lagos, or I'm looking at Rwanda, and I say, okay, well, I want to engage with the community. What's the first steps, and what are the criteria to actually find the right people to partner with?
Yeah, I think, for any business or any entrepreneur, everything is a risk, so, and first and foremost, you need to take the risk, because it's within you taking the risk that you can be able to enjoy benefits. But technology has made things so much easier for us to be able to find out who the connectors are and who are the people that are out and about and that are known. But as a starting point, we within the, call it, middle and lower end of the market, always have people that are well renowned or well known within particular areas. So areas are normally segregated within wards from a South African perspective. So you can talk to those that are politically connected. You can talk to those that own particular businesses, because it's always the business owners that own, for instance, a car wash. He will be known in the community, or someone who owns a chisanyama. He will be known in the community, and indirectly that person becomes a community leader. And by him being a community leader, he can become a connector, because it's whom people actually look up to. So therefore he is a person of influence. So that for me would be the first starting point. Talk to those people that have some form of influence within the community, whom the community knows and whom the community trusts. So engage with them, and they would be able to lead you in the right direction. They may not be your partner, but they will always be able to connect you to other connectors or other people who will then be able to lead you in the right direction that will enable you to be able to do business in that area.
And thank you for not using the word influencer. I think we all have a pet peeve, all of us that try to be authentic and empathetic. And you talk about this whole influencer marketing thing. It's about connectors, and that's a great point. Absolutely. And you circled back to technology again, so let's pick that up. I'm from Silicon Valley, and we're developing all sorts of great tech for middle-income countries and for disadvantaged communities and for poor people. But I'm sitting in San Jose. What do I know about what's happening in Angola or Mozambique? On the other side, you have a consumer that's thought of to be not sophisticated, but they are sophisticated and they use technology in the same ways that you and I do, right? So what's the best way to connect that? How do we connect technology that people that don't understand emerging markets can offer with emerging market consumers that actually want something that's slightly different from what you and I want?
So yet again, Greg, I think for me, it goes back to the fundamentals in terms of being able to connect technology to the right connectors. Maybe sitting in a different area of the world, but you need to be able to get to a particular area of the world. So you need to connect with someone within that particular area who will then open doors for you and who will then connect you to other people. So the connector model for me is key and fundamental because unfortunately we don't know every area. When we form partnerships with people, we need to form partnerships with people that have an understanding of the environment and of the area that we are looking to penetrate or infiltrate. So we need to marry the two, the connector as well as the technology, and then bring in the education element within it as well. Because people will not just pick up something that they don't know. They need to be educated on it, they need to be taught, and then they need to get into practicing the use of it, and then they then start becoming genuine users who then experiment even further and then take it to the next level. So, but it's with using those end consumers in that area that you will be able to even improve on your technology, because you'll be providing them with opportunities to improve so that they can be able to better your technology in order for them to be able to get the best use of what you're trying to sell to them.
Yeah, that's awesome. So again, I'm sitting in New York, and I see that all my global markets have stagnated. This is even pre-COVID. We can assume that things will come back to economic stability late next year. But I really want to look at Africa as a market. Now we know it has 1.2 billion people, with only 2% of the world economy. So you got to pick your battles and pick your fights. So what's the first step for a multinational, whether it be from Asia or from North America or from Europe? What's the first step in evaluating opportunities in Africa? And that may be a very unfair, difficult question.
Yeah, I mean, for me, research and researching what is currently happening and researching what are the trends that are taking place. Because when you research, it gives you information, and that information, if you apply it towards where the market is moving, you will then be able to start seeing gaps that you can be able to penetrate. Or you'll start finding opportunities that other companies are taking advantage of, and which you can improve on. Because innovation is not necessarily doing, which is totally different, but it's about innovating one or two small things and making it better for the end consumer, for them to receive value, because we're all in the business of providing value. So how can I make use of a particular product or service more valuable to you, or how can I provide you with more value through giving you more for less? So research what is currently happening, researching what the trends are, and then researching the players in that market, for me, is always a starting point. It's about doing your homework and making sure that you are prepared for whatever market you are looking to enter.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And time's not on our side, so I'd like to ask one last question about humanity and creating human experiences in the COVID era and in a tech era as well, where so much more of what we do is it's on these things. So how do brands go about creating those human experiences in the COVID era?
The first thing, Greg, and my mantra for the work that I do is, I'm in the business of authentically creating meaningful human connections. The key word there is authentic, and creating meaningful human connections. That is my mantra, and that is what I'm in the business of doing. So brands and organizations out there, for me, first and foremost, particularly within this pandemic, they need to be empathetic. You know, people's lives have been impacted greatly, not only their own individual lives, but also their lives in terms of extended family and friends, etc. So people are not the same as they were. So we need to be empathetic. The next thing is we need to be telling authentic stories. We need to be real. You know, we need to be real. We need to be telling authentic stories which people can relate to. The next thing is we need to strengthen our relationships that we have with our existing customers. It's becoming harder and harder to be able to get new customers. So we need to strengthen the relationships that we have with existing customers. And then the last thing, as we spoke about earlier on, we must always use the channel of choice for the end consumer. So we need to start engaging with the end consumer a lot more frequently and a lot more earlier on in the process, so that we're providing them with solutions which will suit them, not our own thought through solutions which we thought through from a head office perspective, which do not make sense and which do not resonate with the end consumer. But let's think of solutions which will be authentically viable for the end consumer in their channel of choice.
That's awesome. AK, thank you very much so much for your time and for your wisdom. That was really good. There's so much great content and some ideas. Your ideas are fantastic, and I look forward to exploring them later with you as well. Again, for the audience, this podcast was on how COVID-19 has changed consumer marketing in townships and rural markets in Africa. This is the first in a series of podcasts on business development in Africa. And I would like to thank you, AK, again, for your time and for your wisdom.
Thanks a million, Greg. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the time, and I look forward to further engagement post this.
Very good. Thanks, bud.